They didn't expect us to come. The signal was meant for someone else, anyone else. The weak, the benevolent, the predictable. Someone to send aid, someone to follow protocols and negotiate peace. The kind of civilizations that hold councils, sign treaties, and ask permission to act. But that's not who answered. No, the signal was intercepted by Earth, a planet classified by the Galactic Accord as Class D, Death World. A place where apex predators evolved with no natural limit, where nature itself hunted the living, where the weather turned violent with no warning, and where survival wasn't just a trait, it was religion. And the humans? They were its children. The transmission had come from the planet Gornex 7, a once prosperous agricultural world on the edge of the Delvani spiral. Its people, soft-skinned, feathered bipeds called the Ellery, were peaceful, communal, and naive. They were artists, growers, healers, and they were being wiped out. The invaders called themselves the Thrask Dominion, 6-armed reptilian giants bred for conquest. No warning, no declaration, just atmospheric bombardment followed by planetary landfall. Within a week, Gornex 7 was choking in smoke and blood. The Elari's last act was a panicked signal blast, a universal SOS, a cry in the dark, and someone heard it. The file was intercepted by the salvage vessel Hammerfall, orbiting Pluto's debris ring. It wasn't military, not officially, but the humans on board had teeth. Former special forces, mercs, engineers turned bounty hunters. Men who weren't afraid to die because they'd already seen what life looked like when everything soft had been stripped away. The ship's captain, a man known only as Cross, stared at the transmission on the cracked, hollow display. The Elari voice was shaking, terrified, pleading. "Please, if anyone hears this, they're killing us. We have no weapons. We didn't fight. Please!" He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. Instead, he lit a cigarette with a scorched plasma torch and exhaled a slow breath. "Plot a course," he growled. His second-in-command, a cyborg veteran named Greaves, narrowed his one remaining eye. "Sir, that's deep in Dominion space." Cross shrugged. "They asked for help. They didn't ask for us." Cross let the silence hang in the cabin. Then, "That's the part I like." 3 jumps later, they emerged into Gornex 7's upper orbit. The sight that met them would have made lesser species weep. Fires covered the northern hemisphere. Forests turned to ash. Cities shattered like glass under the Dominion's heel. But the humans didn't flinch. They'd seen worse. Hell, they'd done worse. Cross stood at the viewport, fingers drumming against the steel railing. "Status?" "Atmospheric scans confirm heavy Thrask activity," Greaves said. "They're mopping up survivors in the valleys. Civilian signatures. Minimal." "Any friendlies left?" "One, faint signal coming from a bunker below the eastern cliffs. Could be a child. Could be bait." Cross's jaw clenched. "Don't care. Prep the drop pods." Greaves turned. "Just us?" Cross met his gaze, dead and unblinking. "They called for help. They didn't say how many." The Thrask never stood a chance. The Hammerfall's drop pods hit the dirt like meteor strikes. 6 hardened men. No backup, no air support, just rifles, blades, and spite. They didn't come to save anyone. They came to punish. The first squad of Thrask was torn apart before they even knew what hit them. One lost its head to a thermal axe. Another screamed as its spine was crushed under a human's armored boot. They'd never fought humans before. They never would again. The Elari child, a young female, barely conscious, was pulled from the rubble by Greaves. She blinked up at his scarred face, eyes wide with horror. Are you the saviors?" Greaves didn't answer. He just handed her a water pouch and turned back toward the battlefield. "You called the storm, kid," he muttered. "Now watch it burn." The bunker reeked of scorched metal and old fear. The walls, once polished white, were stained with smoke and cracked by tremors. Lights flickered overhead, the emergency power barely keeping the place alive. Dust settled in waves from the ceiling with each distant explosion. The child, still clutching the water pouch like a lifeline, watched them with a look humans knew too well. Terror layered over faint hope. Cross crouched beside her, his armor hissing softly as servos adjusted to his movements. She was small, malnourished, with purple-gray feathers matted against her skin. Probably hadn't eaten a full meal in days. He didn't say anything, just reached into his belt pouch and pulled out a protein bar. "Here," he muttered, offering it. She hesitated, then took it with trembling fingers. "What's your name, kid?" he asked. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. Lyria." "Lyria," Cross repeated, then stood. "Stay in the corner. Don't move unless one of us says so." Greaves stepped in, the doorframe barely accommodating his armored frame. "Perimeter's clear for now. Dominion forces pulled back after the last strike." "They regrouping?" "No doubt." Cross nodded once. "Good. I want 'em all in one place." Greaves smirked. "That can be arranged." They didn't come to Gornex 7 to rescue. That part was already lost. The cities had burned, the weak were dead, and the Dominion had claimed another trophy world. But what the Thrask never counted on was what would crawl out of Earth's dark corners in response. The type of men who weren't heroes, weren't military, weren't even sane by most galactic standards. They came for one reason: vengeance. Not because they cared, not because they believed in justice, but because the galaxy needed to remember what humanity was capable of when it stopped pretending to be civilized. The plan was simple. Find the Dominion's command node, make noise, draw every warm body to them, and then bury the entire unit in a crater of fire, lead, and steel. They moved like wolves through the night. 6 men in total: Cross, Greaves, Dalton, Pike, Venn, and Roth. Each one carried scars older than the Dominion's rise, ex-soldiers, dishonorably discharged or labeled unstable. One had burned a warlord alive on Arson 9 for selling kids. Another used to run executions for the Mars Penal Corps. None of them were good men, but they were the right kind of bad. Their first hit was surgical. A mobile comm tower sitting at the edge of the scorched plains. Dominion grunts used it to coordinate sweeps and report insurgent activity. The crew manning it were bored, half asleep, barely alert, until Pike slid a fusion knife through one's throat from behind. 3 more were gunned down before they could reach their weapons. One tried to run. Greaves didn't let him get far. A high-velocity round took off half the creature's torso. Blood sprayed across the relay panel. "Try to scream quieter next time," Greaves muttered. Cross moved in, planting explosives. "We're not staying long." "What about the tower?" Dalton asked, his fingers twitching near his sidearm. Cross didn't answer. Just flicked the detonator and kept walking. The explosion lit up the sky behind them, sending a shockwave across the Badlands. The smoke rose like a funeral torch. The Dominion noticed. Within minutes, scout flyers buzzed overhead. Cross and his team vanished into the shadows, watching from ravines and burned-out husks of trees. The Dominion were fast, efficient, brutal, but predictable. The humans weren't looking to outrun them. They were herding them. "Next target?" Venn asked. Cross glanced at the topographic scan on his wrist plate. "Convoy hub, 4 clicks northeast. They're moving supplies and prisoners through there." Think the girl's family is still alive? No. Ven didn't press. That was the kind of answer you learned not to challenge. The convoy station was larger. 2 prefab towers and a hangar surrounded by makeshift walls and turrets. Heavily guarded. Dominion banners fluttered, black and red, across the barricades. A fresh row of slaves, Ilari, broken and bleeding, were being marched into the hangar like cattle. 15 guards outside, Roth muttered, peering through his rifle's scope. More inside, at least 2 commanders. We take them clean, Cross said. No friendly fire. Collateral's not the target. Copy, the others said in unison. The assault started with Ven triggering a flare round into the sky, drawing the outer guards' attention. As they looked up, Dalton tossed 2 flash charges over the wall. Screams followed. Blinded Thrask stumbled into the open, where Pike and Roth cut them down with practiced precision. Inside, chaos bloomed. The prisoners dove for cover. Alarms blared. Dominion officers shouted in their guttural tongue. Cross walked in through the smoke. His rifle barked once, twice. Each shot took a target between the eyes. One tried to charge him. He dropped the gun, drew a thermal hatchet, and cleaved through the creature's chest plate like cardboard. By the time it ended, 17 Thrask bodies lay cooling in their own blood. The humans didn't bother counting. One prisoner, an older Ilari male, tried to speak. Why are you doing this? Cross stared at him, face unreadable behind the helmet. Because we're worse than them, he said, turning away. By now, the Dominion was furious. A Death World raiding party had landed and was gutting their occupation zone from within. They mobilized half their remaining forces, abandoned sweep patterns, and pushed toward the humans' last known location. This was exactly what Cross wanted. He had something planned for them. Using stolen Dominion gear, Roth jammed their comms and rerouted a command-level ping to draw their officers into a canyon network known locally as the Whispering Faults, narrow, unstable ravines surrounded by jagged cliffs. "Why here?" Pike asked, as they planted charges across the rock walls. Cross checked the detonator. "Because we're not soldiers. We're predators." Greaves grunted. "Let the jungle eat 'em." The first wave came at dawn. Hover transports screeched overhead, dropping squads of armored lizards into the canyon mouth. They advanced in tight formation, rifles scanning, unaware that the cliffs themselves had been turned into death traps. The first charge blew when the lead squad passed the central ridge. A section of the cliff face collapsed, crushing 2 APCs and burying a dozen-foot soldiers alive. Panic set in. As they scattered for cover, Roth triggered the second wave. Thermite mines. Bursts of liquid fire ignited the rock, forcing the Dominion into choke points, right where the humans waited. Greaves stepped out of cover and opened fire, his cannon roaring like thunder. Pike lobbed cluster grenades into tight formations. Ven picked off runners from high ground. Screams echoed through the faults. Cross didn't fire. Not yet. He just watched, eyes cold behind the visor, tracking the Dominion officer he'd marked, the same bastard who'd personally overseen the extermination squads on Gornek 7's eastern continent. Cross had memorized the footage, the smug face, the arrogance. He wanted that one alive. The ambush became a massacre. By the time the dust settled, over 60 Thrask lay dead or dying. The survivors had retreated, but they weren't running scared. They were falling back to regroup. This wasn't over. The Dominion wouldn't accept humiliation lightly. They'd bring everything next time, which suited Cross just fine. Back at the bunker, Lariah hadn't moved from her corner. She clutched the half-eaten protein bar, eyes wide every time the ground shook. She wasn't stupid. She knew what the humans were doing. The screams from far away told her enough. But what scared her more was how quiet they were when they came back. Not a word, not a boast, not a joke, just bloody boots and the stink of war. Dalton sat by the door, cleaning his rifle. Greaves reloaded silently. Pike patched a burn on his forearm with no sound but the hiss of a med spray. Lariah finally asked, voice fragile, "Are you really here to help us?" Cross sat down near the terminal, sighing as he pulled off his helmet. His face was a mess of scars, one eye cybernetic, a jaw stitched with old metal. "No," he said after a pause. "We're not here to help you. We're here to make them regret it." She didn't ask who them was. She didn't need to. That night, the Thrask Dominion sent a message. Literally. A single body was dropped from orbit into the plains outside the bunker. One of the human drop pods, charred and split. Inside was a head. Human. Bloodied. Mouth sewn shut. A warning. Cross looked at it in silence. Then he turned to his men. "They think this scares us?" "No," Roth replied, lighting a cigarette off a still-burning eye socket. "But it means they're coming." Greaves cracked his knuckles. "Let 'em." The last stand was coming. Cross had one final plan. Draw the Dominion's full force to a location of their choosing. A mining facility half buried in the mountains, rich in explosive minerals. Let them come with everything, and blow it all to hell. "Suicide?" Dalton asked. "Maybe," Cross said, "but I'm done running. You in?" The others nodded. No hesitation. They were already dead men anyway. Earth had seen to that long ago. This question mark, this was just their last war, and by God it was going to be loud. The sky over Gornek 7 had changed. No longer the peaceful lavender haze the Ilari once painted in their songs, it had turned black, not from the night, but from the Dominion war fleet blocking out the stars. Massive carrier vessels floated like jagged gods, blotting out the last lights of hope. Dropships buzzed below them in steady formations, preparing to rain death once more. This wasn't a mission anymore. It was a purge. The Thrask Dominion had had enough. What began as a planetary sweep turned into an occupation, then a bloody embarrassment at the hands of 6 humans. 6. 6 apex bastards from a backwater death world had made an army look like amateurs, and the Dominion couldn't let that stain spread. So they came in force. But that was exactly what Cross wanted. They chose the old mining facility for one reason: the core veins below the surface. Gornek 7's rocky interior was rich in volatile minerals, titanium nitrate, compressed hydrogen vents, and trace amounts of xenoplasmic gas used in star drives. A single misplaced laser could ignite the entire site into a fireball big enough to erase a small city. And Cross had no intention of missing. They arrived just after sunrise, dragging salvaged supplies from the convoy station, planting explosives, rigging fusion charges along structural supports. Ven worked the outer perimeter, setting motion-triggered anti-vehicle mines. Roth rewired the facility's old energy grid into a self-destruct deadman's switch. Pike repurposed plasma welders into heat turrets. Even Lariah, small and silent, helped where she could, running cables, moving ammo crates, tightening bolts with shaking hands. She never asked what all this was for. The look in the human's eyes told her everything. This was a graveyard in the making, either theirs or the enemy's. Cross looked down at the scanner panel, watching blips move across the screen. 5 hours out, he said, voice low. Good, Greaves grunted. Let's finish setting the table. Back on the command cruiser, Vorthanak, General Corral stood before his lieutenants, claws twitching with disdain. I want them alive, he hissed. A younger officer blinked. Alive, sir? Corral turned slowly, the scars on his snout twitching. I want to look them in the eye when I break their bones. These creatures embarrassed us before the Accord. That dishonor will be repaid. But, if they resist? Corral smiled, a sick, toothy gesture. Then we burn the planet. The humans weren't delusional. They knew they wouldn't win, not in the way that mattered to armies or empires. There were too many coming, too much weight behind the Dominion. This wasn't about survival. It was about message. Let the galaxy know. When Deathworlders hear your distress signal, they don't come to rescue. They come to ruin the ones who made it necessary. Cross stood alone on the landing platform as the first Dominion flyers appeared on the horizon. Black specks against the blood-colored sunrise. His helmet was off, hair wild in the wind, face marked with grime and old wounds. In one hand, he held his rifle. In the other, a detonator. He wasn't thinking about medals or glory. He was thinking about Earth. About the jungle he crawled through on Titan during the war. About the sound of his brother's last scream over a comm channel. About the tribunal that labeled him unfit for combat because he refused to obey a retreat order. About how no one came to help his unit. He remembered what abandonment felt like. And now, someone else would feel it tenfold. The assault began at full force. 3 transports broke from formation and descended onto the upper ridgeline, deploying squads of Thrask shock troopers. Plasma rounds lit the air. Explosions rocked the valley. Ven was the first to return fire, his sniper rifle punching holes through enemy armor with mechanical calm. Pike's turrets came alive, spraying molten plasma at incoming flanks. Roth stood behind a barricade with a rotary cannon, teeth bared as he carved a screaming line through the Thrask vanguard. They came in waves, each one stronger than the last, but the humans held. Every inch of ground was soaked in alien blood. Every corner was trapped, mined, or fire slicked. The facility wasn't a fortress. It was a trap, designed to lure, confuse, and then consume. By the second hour, the Dominion had already lost 2 carriers, downed by rerouted mining lasers and a fusion mine disguised as a coolant leak. Bodies littered the approach like discarded armor. Still they came. Still they died. Lyria hid beneath the central turbine platform, her feathers shaking as the ground trembled with each explosion. She could hear them, the humans shouting orders, cursing through gritted teeth, laughing even as they bled. One voice rang louder than the rest. Cross. She peeked over the edge just in time to see him crush a Thrask skull under his boot, fire into 2 more with a shotgun, then dive for cover behind a scorched pillar. He moved like a machine, not like a man. There was something terrifying in how unshaken he looked, like death didn't matter to him. Maybe it didn't. By hour 3, they began falling back. Pike was the first hit, plasma to the chest. He kept firing as he burned, screaming through his teeth until Cross pulled him behind cover and snapped his neck. A mercy. Dalton vanished during a perimeter run. His body was never found. Ven took a blade through the gut. Slumped against the wall, he handed Roth his last magazine and said, "Make it count." Greaves lost an arm, but fought with the other. When they finally pinned him beneath rubble, he activated a micro-nuke strapped to his chest, took out a quarter of the Thrask forward unit in one scream of white light. By the 4th hour, only Cross and Roth were left. And the girl. The command cruiser loomed closer now, blotting out the mountains behind it. From its underbelly dropped a massive troop platform. The final wave. The death blow. Cross stood atop the central tower, blood dripping from his hands, armor cracked and hissing with steam. His rifle was out, his knife broken, but his grip on the detonator was steady. You see it? Roth shouted from below, gun barrel glowing red. Yeah. We gonna make it? No. Roth spat blood and grinned. Good. Inside the generator chamber, Lyria clutched the cable she had wired earlier, the last piece of the trigger system. Her small fingers trembled, ready to jam it into the socket and send the signal through the core. She looked up at Cross one last time. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. As the Thrask final wave approached, swarming the ruins, Cross stepped out onto the broken ledge of the tower, arms spread. His face was bare. His eyes locked on the lead commander, Corral, standing smug at the edge of the transport, watching through oculars. Cross raised the detonator. "This is what happens," he shouted, voice carrying through the wind, "when you hurt the weak and expect silence." He pressed the switch. The ground didn't shake, it screamed. The entire mining complex erupted from beneath, a pillar of white-hot death exploding into the sky. The xenoplasmic core ignited first, sending shockwaves through the rock. Then the nitrate veins caught fire, chain reaction detonations tearing through the mountainside. The Dominion troops barely had time to turn. Corral screamed orders. Too late. The firestorm consumed them. The last image burned into Corral's neural feed was a human smiling into the light. Then nothing. Later, the Accord would send survey drones to the site. They'd find no survivors, no bodies, just melted rock, twisted steel, and blackened ground stretching for miles. But one thing survived. The message. Multiple witnesses in adjacent systems confirmed an intercepted audio transmission, broadcast in every known language. It wasn't long, just a single voice. "This is Earth. You hurt them. We heard." And somewhere deep in the badlands of a forgotten planet, a small Ilari girl wandered the ash-covered plains, eyes hardened by fire, feathers scorched at the edges, carrying the last name of a man who never smiled. She didn't cry. She didn't hide. She waited. Because she knew the stars had changed. And someone, somewhere, would need help again. And this time, she'd be the one to bring the storm. The fire didn't fade. Not completely. Long after the mines blew, after the canyon collapsed and the Thrask war fleet burned into the clouds, Gornek 7's sky remained blood-red. Smoke pillars twisted up toward the heavens, black and towering, as if the planet itself had screamed and then exhaled its vengeance. For weeks, nothing flew near the coordinates of the blast zone, not even scavengers. Drones from fringe planets recorded live feeds of the firestorm, but most corrupted within seconds, electromagnetic pulses shorting systems, AI navigation scrambling to make sense of the crater that had erased half a mountain. Then, a strange thing happened. The signal played again. Not the distress call. Something else. A message, crude in its frequency but powerful in its delivery. Shot from a salvaged Dominion relay array and launched on open channels, bouncing off moons and drifting comm stations like a virus made of rage. A single line, spoken by a human voice and stitched into every frequency. "You made them call for help," we answered. "Next time, we won't wait for the invitation." Across the galaxy, reactions were immediate and divided. On Ravari Prime, members of the Galactic Accord's diplomatic council gathered in solemn panic, reviewing footage with grim expressions and fraying nerves. They'd always treated Earth as a curiosity. Volatile, yes, but mostly isolated. Technologically behind. Socio-politically fractured. Dangerous, but containable. Until now. The footage was undeniable. 6 humans, unofficial, unsanctioned, likely acting independently. But they'd done what entire Accord military arms failed to do for decades, cripple a Dominion forward base. Not with fleets, not with legislation, but with brute, unfiltered violence. "This is unacceptable," said a Zarthian ambassador, tendrils flaring. "Unbelievable is the word you're looking for," muttered a Harkur diplomat. "They weaponized a mining facility," another added, eyes twitching. "They tricked the Thrask into walking straight into a trap. That's feral warfare." "Number, that's Deathworld thinking," said a cold voice from the shadows of the room. And now it's awake. On the fringe station of Vox 5, humans were no longer mocked in the cantinas. No more jokes about Earth's poverty, no casual slurs about dirt bloods or mud monkeys. Bartenders who used to serve humans last now poured their drinks first. Silence followed when they entered a room. Fear is a strange kind of respect. A name started circulating. Cross. No last name, no rank. Just that. Cross. His face, stitched together from drone fragments and underground videos, spread like wildfire on black market data sheets. Not smiling, not boasting, just standing in front of a mountain of dead Thrask with his weapon at his side and smoke curling from the ruins behind him. Some said he was a ghost. Others said he wasn't dead, just disappeared into the storm. Either way, his name made aliens lower their voices and clutch their weapons tighter. Meanwhile, the Thrask Dominion was bleeding. Cross's final strike had done more than kill soldiers. It had exposed them. Word spread through the systems they occupied that they could be hurt. That Deathworlders, primitive humans, had made them bleed in public, on the record, with only 6 men. Their pride turned to paranoia. Recruitment fell. Resistance grew. On planets like Lurshan 3 and Dazar, oppressed species began fighting back, emboldened by the myth of Earth's revenge squad. And Corral? He never reported back. His remains were never found. Officially, the Dominion claimed he died with honor. Unofficially, his family name was purged from the hierarchy, scrubbed from records, as if even the Dominion wanted to pretend he never existed. Back on Earth, things didn't change. Not much. The governments didn't acknowledge what happened on Gornex 7. No news bulletins, no public statements. The mission wasn't sanctioned, and Cross and his team had long been ghosts to their respective agencies. But in quiet corners, things stirred. A signal pinged through old satellite links. It carried no coordinates, no voice, just a symbol, a skull with a star behind it, Earth's ancient warning flag from the Outer Colony Wars, a sign only the oldest veterans recognized. It meant, we're back. On Gornex 7, the girl survived. Lyria. She walked alone through the cracked plains, ash clinging to her feathers, eyes locked on the horizon. She didn't cry, she didn't speak, she just walked through the remains of camps, through the skeletons of towers, through what was once her home. She scavenged what she could, built a shelter from bent steel, learned to shoot with one of Roth's old rifles. Her hands were too small at first, but she adjusted. She had time. Cross had taught her one thing. Survival wasn't instinct. It was choice. And she chose not to die. One day, years later, a freighter landed outside her perimeter. Private scavengers, judging by the markings. Sloppy, loud, overconfident. 3 of them, laughing about picking through the bones of the Deathworlders' playground. She watched from a ridge, waited. When the last one wandered into her trapline, she pulled the trigger. Plasma bolts stitched across the dirt, then silence. The others never made it back to their ship. She carved one word into the freighter's hull before she sent it back into orbit, aimed straight at a neutral accord station. Remember? In the years that followed, stories multiplied. No longer just about Earth, but about the Deathworlders. A name that used to be scientific classification now meant something else entirely. Something whispered in military camps and outpost bars. Something taught in secret by resistance cells. It meant, if they come, you better run. Legends surfaced. A colony ship ambushed by pirates, only to have the crew turned to paste when one human unchained himself and killed every attacker with a wrench and a fire hose. A Black Ops unit formed from descendants of the Hammerfall crew, known only as the Last Drop. 6 men, no identifiers, recruited from Earth's worst war zones, dropped into war zones without warning. A rumor that Earth doesn't ask permission anymore. If they find suffering, they act. No treaties, no politics, just resolve. Some said they saw Cross again, older, grayer, with one arm replaced by a metal cannon. Others said he was dead, but his name was being used like a ghost signal, activating sleeper agents, stirring old warriors. A phrase became common graffiti on Outer Rim walls. Don't send a signal unless you're ready for the storm. But not everyone loved what the humans had become. In the Accord's central systems, a movement began to contain humanity again. Politicians called them uncontrolled agents of chaos. Propaganda flooded the upper worlds, videos of Earth's violent past, wars, riots, nuclear brinkmanship. A senator from Taudraz 4 demanded sanctions. "They're not a people," he shouted on the assembly floor. "They're a weapon we no longer hold the leash to." But behind closed doors, more than one world leader whispered something else. What if we need them again? Because the Thrask weren't the only threat. Something darker was rising beyond the galactic rim. A silence where probes vanished, where stars blinked out, where whispers spoke of ancient machines waking beneath cold stone. And if that darkness came knocking, maybe Earth was the only one insane enough to knock back harder. Back on Gornex 7, beneath a scorched sky, Lariah trained alone. Every day, she set up her perimeter, practiced shooting, tracking, building traps. She wore Roth's goggles now, kept Cross's knife close to her chest, not because she worshipped them, but because she remembered. And memories were weapons. One evening, while staring into the fire, a low hum passed over the plains. A scout drone, triangular, battered, hovered above her camp. She didn't flinch. A voice cracked from it, glitched and low. "You're not dead." She said nothing. "We need someone like you." She stared into the fire, then back at the drone. "The next storm's coming." The drone dropped a sealed packet, black armor plates, thermal tags, and a communicator with a blinking red light. She didn't open it right away, just stared into the distance, then whispered, "Let it come." The communicator blinked for 3 days. Lariah didn't answer it at first, not because she didn't know how. She'd dissected more Dominion tech than she could count, but because she needed time. Time to measure the weight of the moment. The packet dropped by the drone was no random kit. Black armor with matte panels, steel joints that flexed with perfect silence, flexible thermal padding cut for mobility, not protection. This was armor built not for marching or standing guard. It was made for vanishing, for striking from the dark and leaving no witnesses. There was no emblem, no insignia. Only the initials D-7 burned into the left pauldron. Deathworlder Protocol 7. The kind of assignment that didn't exist on any official records. The kind that was whispered about in ghost stories and used by rogue agencies when someone needed to disappear, or when a war was coming that diplomacy couldn't touch. She finally activated the communicator on the 4th night. It didn't open to a screen. No face, no image, just a voice. Male. Human. Steady. You're alive. Good. Lyria stayed quiet. We're pulling together a team. High impact, off-grid. You've been marked as a primary candidate. You survived Gornek 7. You know how the Dominion works. And you've seen what happens when no one comes to help. Still, she didn't speak. The voice continued, unbothered by her silence. There's something moving out past the rim. We lost contact with 8 colonies in the Haran dust belt. No distress signals. Just silence. We found one scout, drifting. Pilot had ripped out their own eyes. A pause. We're not sending diplomats. We're not sending soldiers. We're sending nightmares. She finally spoke, voice like dry paper. I'm not a soldier. No, the voice agreed. You're worse. And then the line went dead. The stars looked different from space. From Gornek 7's surface, they were distant and cold. But now, in the cramped cockpit of a stealth insertion craft, Lyria watched them slide past like fireflies caught in gravity's pull. The ship made no sound, just a low vibration that hummed through her bones. The armor fit perfectly. They'd tailored it for someone like her. Small, fast, lethal. She had Cross's knife strapped to her thigh and Roth's sidearm clamped against her hip. She hadn't spoken to anyone in 2 weeks. Not until now. A human sat across from her in the dim cabin, late 40s, skin burned from too many suns, eyes like sharpened steel. He said his name was Grim, and he'd been part of the Hammerfall's sister ship during the first Gornek strike. You were there? She asked. He nodded once. I buried Pike. They didn't speak after that. The craft dropped out of warp just above Joran 5, one of the vanished colonies. Once a thriving mid-tech world, it had produced agricultural synths for 4 sectors. Now it hovered below them like a corpse. No lights, no movement, no response. Grim piloted the insertion while Lyria watched the surface scan. City grid is still functional. Energy signatures in the South Dome. Looks like a perimeter? Traps, Grim said. Whoever's still breathing down there doesn't want company. They landed on the outer rim of the city ruins. The atmosphere was breathable, barely, but thick with smoke and chemical rot. Ash drifted through the streets like falling snow. Lyria moved like shadow through alleys and broken storefronts. Every step was calculated, every breath shallow. This was what Cross trained them for. Not how to fight, but how to move, how to watch, how to hunt. What they found inside the dome wasn't a massacre. It was an altar. Bodies, hundreds of them, suspended in the air by metal spikes. Not pierced, fused. Flesh melted into steel as if they'd been dragged into it molecule by molecule. Faces frozen in mid-scream, eyes burned out, hearts missing. Grim stood beside her, jaw clenched. This wasn't the Thrask, he muttered. They'd never do something like this. Too ritualistic. Lyria said nothing. She knelt beside one of the corpses and ran a scanner over the fused metal. The results made her stomach twist. Organic nanotech, she said. Grim stared. Like viral bots? No. Older. Smarter. This wasn't mechanical. This was fed. They found one survivor, buried beneath a collapsed maintenance bunker, half dead and shivering. The old man was a technician with cybernetic implants, fried by whatever had taken the city. His voice stuttered and lagged like a corrupted file, but the terror was clear. They came from under the ground, he rasped. Not ships, not soldiers, whispers, machines with voices, teeth made of code. We tried to hide, tried to... He seized mid-sentence, then screamed, and from his open mouth came something not human, not language, a low, grinding hum that made Grim's visor flicker. Lyria reeled back, weapon drawn. His eyes exploded. Not just blood. Wires. Thin black strands of crawling metal erupted from his skull, reaching towards them like fingers. Grim fired 3 shots point blank. The body stopped moving, but the strands twitched long after. Laria's skin crawled. This wasn't war. This was something older. Back on the ship, Grim opened a sealed case in the wall panel and handed Laria a flat black disc. "What's this?" she asked. "A ghost key," he said. "You ever hear of the Eden Protocol?" She shook her head. Before the Accord was formed, there was a black site program run by Earth's shadow agencies. They believed there were forces in the outer dark, things older than civilizations, programs, entities that weren't alive but wanted to replace the living. He held up the disc. "This opens a vault. There's only 3 left in the galaxy. Each one holds a different kind of hell." Laria stared at the disc. "Why give it to me?" "Because you don't flinch," he said, "and I'm getting too old to finish what Cross started." Over the next few weeks, they visited the vanished colonies one by one. Each one told a different kind of horror. On Valen 9, an orbital station had been turned inside out, metal folded like origami, crew stuffed into air vents like meat. On Marnus Reef, the ocean world, entire cities floated belly up in the water, their residents drowned not from the sea, but from their own blood boiling out of their lungs. And on Kralos Delta, the ground was scorched into perfect circles, miles wide, as if something massive had simply hovered, feeding silently from the planet's core before disappearing. The pattern was clear. It wasn't conquest, it was consumption. Something was testing the galaxy, preparing. And Earth was the only one who remembered what the old wars looked like. The ones fought not with ships and troops, but with ideas, infection, and terror. One night, orbiting dead space near the Varos Drift, Lyria stood alone in the command chamber, staring at the disk. She thought about Gornek 7, about the bunker, about Cross, walking into fire like it was his birthright. She thought about how the Accord had ignored the cries for help, how the Dominion had laughed when the Ellery screamed, and how Earth, the monsters from the mud, had answered without permission. She clenched the disk. Whatever came next would make the Thrask look like insects, and this time she wouldn't wait for the signal. She'd send it. The vault wasn't on any map, not officially. Hidden beneath the crust of a dead moon orbiting a failed planet, it sat in silence, no power signature, no beacon, just a black scar carved into stone. It didn't glow. It didn't pulse. It waited. Lyria stepped off the dropship in complete silence. The surface beneath her boots was scorched, brittle, littered with the remains of forgotten battles, rusted armor, fossilized bones, broken visors with Earth flags burned off by solar winds. Grim stood beside her, grim as ever. "Eden Vault 1, he said, "built before Earth had an Accord seat, when we were still considered unstable by galactic standards." "What's inside?" she asked. He looked down at the disk in her hand. "The worst parts of our imagination, made real." They descended into the crater in silence. The entry gate was half buried in lunar dust, a titanic slab of alloyed obsidian 20 meters tall. Symbols covered its surface, not words but warnings, etched deep in patterns designed to be understood on a primal level. Fear, containment, sacrifice. Lyria pressed the disk into the core. It hissed. Word. Then the slab split with a rumble like mountains breaking. Inside, darkness yawned wide. Not absence of light, true void. A silence so deep it made her ears pop. They entered with weapons drawn. The vault's halls were wide, sloped downward, lined with cables embedded into the walls like veins. Every 50 meters, red-lit alcoves displayed items behind transparent glass, human artifacts sealed in pressure cases, most labeled only by numbers and dates. A cracked astronaut's helmet, a black syringe suspended in zero-gravity fluid, a hollow book with a voice recorder embedded in the spine. "This place," Lyria whispered. "It's a museum." Grimm nodded. "Of human failure." They stopped before one display larger than the rest, a cryopod, heavily reinforced, its glass fogged from within. The tag read, "Project Maelstrom, aborted, do not engage." Grimm stared at it for a long time. That one was built to counter psychological warfare. The subject could survive memory attacks, hallucinations, identity shredders, but it started changing, turned on its handlers, said it saw a world beyond ours. That time had shapes and teeth. Lyria stepped back. "That thing's alive?" "Barely," Grimm said. "But it dreams. That's worse." The deeper they went, the colder it became, not just in temperature, but in presence. Lyria could feel something watching them, not from behind, but inside the vault. A presence buried so deep into the walls it was impossible to pinpoint. She stopped in front of a sealed door labeled Black Fold, Tier 7 access only. "This is it," Grimm said, "the place the disc opens." The lock responded the moment she approached. The door split open like a mouth. No sound, no welcome. Inside was a single room. A chair bolted to the floor. A console. A thick fiber optic cable running from the ceiling straight into the seat's spine interface. Grimm didn't move. Lyria stepped forward. "What is this?" she asked. "The ghost chair," he said. "It connects your mind directly into the Eden net, a quantum bleed interface of human memories, horrors, data fractures from wars no one remembers, built from stolen tech, ancient AI bones, and something we still can't explain." She turned to him. "Why me?" He took a slow breath. "Because you survived. You walked through hell and you're still sane. That means you might come out the other side of this without screaming." She stared at the chair. "And if I scream?" Grimm shrugged. "Then I shoot you and we close this place forever." She didn't hesitate. The moment she sat, the chair clamped down with a soft click, and the room faded. Then, nothing. No colors, no light. Just memories, not hers. She stood on an Earth that no longer existed. A blackened city filled with burning skyships and rain made of ash. Soldiers in broken exosuits screamed as invisible entities flayed them from within. A child's laughter echoed from every direction. Then she stood on a moon orbiting a gas giant, watching a fleet vanish without being touched, as if the void itself had swallowed them. Then she was falling through time, centuries, millennia, watching civilizations rise, burn, repeat. At the core of it all, a presence, cold, patient, deliberate, not a species, not a god, an algorithm, born before stars, sleeping in radiation, feeding on sentience, the Harbinger Protocol. It didn't attack. It didn't conquer. It waited for intelligence to evolve past instinct, for language, tools, thought. Then it infected, slowly, surgically, not through wires or viruses, but through ideas, through stories, through fear, through belief. Civilizations it infected began to rot from within, turning on each other, hallucinating threats, collapsing in paranoid violence. When they were weak enough, it consumed their data, memories, structures, and finally their physical essence, stored in black lattices made of compressed reality. It wasn't extinction. It was editing. As if history was being rewritten to erase everything that wasn't useful. And the Harbinger? It had just awakened again. Lyria gasped as she tore out of the chair, falling to the floor, drenched in sweat and trembling. Grimm caught her before she hit the steel. "What did you see?" She looked up at him with wide eyes. "It's not coming," she whispered. "It's already here." They activated the vault's final protocol, a deep transmission beacon launched from the core, reaching out into space with a signal encrypted in Earth's oldest military language. Binary pulses layered over ancient hymns, reversed and stitched with subharmonic terror codes. The Accord wouldn't understand it. The Dominion wouldn't even hear it. But Earth would. Back on Earth's dark side command station, buried inside a mountain range no satellite could ever see, alarms triggered in rooms sealed since the Martian uprising. An old AI blinked to life. Eden signal received, Tier 1 event. Dozens of men and women stirred from cryo-sleep. Their blood carried synthetic upgrades, war memories from past hosts, and genetic coding designed for one thing: extinction-level retaliation. They didn't ask questions. They suited up. And somewhere in the Varos Rift, on a ship built from salvaged war gods, a man with a half-metal jaw opened his eyes. His voice was a growl. "Bring me the girl." They brought her to the outpost without a name. It didn't exist on maps. You didn't land there unless you were summoned, and if you tried to find it without invitation, you simply vanished. Built into the shell of a decommissioned Dyson fragment orbiting a black hole, the facility was a floating fortress of steel and silence. It had no lights on its exterior. It emitted no heat signature. It was invisible, even to its allies. Grimm sat across from her in the dropship. His face was pale, not from fear, but reverence. He hadn't spoken since they left the Eden Vault. Lyria didn't need words. She could feel it, too. They weren't heading toward safety. They were flying straight into the heart of the storm Earth never told anyone about. Inside the outpost, the air was sharp, sterile. The corridors were narrow, layered in black carbon plates. No soldiers barked orders. No techs gave status updates. Everyone here moved like predators, quiet, fast, unflinching. They passed rooms lined with ancient weapons, neuropulse blades, exo-harnesses molded to the user's bone structure, and things Lyria didn't recognize, things that looked alive, humming faintly in their dormant state. A woman in white approached. Her skin was ink-dark, eyes blank as obsidian. Her voice was flat. "You are the anomaly from Gornek 7. Lyria didn't answer. The woman didn't expect her to. "Follow. The commander is waiting." He stood with his back to her, broad shoulders, buzzed hair, silver at the edges. One hand rested on a steel railing overlooking a command chamber lit with soft red glow. The other hand wasn't a hand at all. It was metal, matte black with exposed servos and pulsing red lines beneath the plating. He didn't turn around at first. Just spoke. "You kept the knife." Lyria froze. The voice, low, ragged, edged with gravel, was impossible. Slowly he turned. Cross. Alive. Older, yes, scarred even more. One eye was now entirely synthetic, the other burned deep with something inhuman. Not rage, not joy, something colder. A focus that didn't blink. "You're supposed to be dead," Lyria said. "I was." He walked toward her with a limp, but not weakness. Every step was deliberate. 3 days after the detonation, a salvage team found me half buried in obsidian slag. No pulse, no blood, just breathing. Barely. "Why didn't you come back?" "Because Earth wouldn't let me." They sat in a briefing chamber deep in the outpost's core, surrounded by holo displays of broken colonies, corrupted data streams, and unexplained disappearances across 6 sectors. Cross stood at the head of the table, beside a 3D projection of a black fractal web. Not a creature, but a presence, tangled across entire star systems like a neural parasite. "We call it the Harbinger," he said. "It doesn't speak, doesn't negotiate. It's not even alive, not by our definition. It's an infection, one that began before Earth even had continents." Lyria leaned forward. "Why now?" "Because the Dominion created enough chaos to clear a path," Cross said. "The Accord got soft, the Thrask got arrogant, and Earth got quiet." Grimm finally spoke. Too quiet. Cross nodded. The Harbinger is moving faster than we predicted, and it's not just infecting planets now, it's rewriting entire civilizations. He tapped a control panel. A planet flickered into view, a once vibrant trade world called Makra Vale. 2 months ago, this was a democratic bastion in the Haran Drift. Now, it's a monotheistic slave cult. No military action, no biological invasion, just ideology, implanted in dreams, in data. In religion, Lyria looked up. And Earth, we've built something they can't consume. A culture that doesn't bend, only breaks. A legacy of trauma so deep even the Harbinger avoids it. He leaned forward. And now, we make them bleed. They showed her the core of Project D7. A chamber the size of a stadium, pulsing with machines older than most empires. Floating tanks carried cloned combat units, not human, not alien, something in between, engineered for psychological warfare, not just physical combat. This is why the Accord fears us, Cross said. They think Earth is unstable. They're wrong. Earth is prepared. One of the tanks cracked open, and a figure dropped onto the floor. Tall, armored, faceless. It knelt in front of Cross and spoke in a flat, genderless voice. Awaiting pain. Lyria frowned. What is that? Our revenge, Cross said. They gave her a room near the command wing. She didn't sleep. Not because she was afraid, but because her blood wouldn't stop humming. Like something in her bones had been waiting for this place her whole life. She stood by the window, watching the stars warp behind the outpost's stealth field. Then came a knock. Cross. He leaned against the doorframe, holding a bottle of something old. Glass. From Earth. No label. Drink? She took it. He sat down without invitation. I watched you, he said after a while. Back on Gornek 7, after we pulled out. I saw the way you scavenged, hunted, how you used the rifle. You weren't just surviving, you were becoming. I didn't have a choice. You did, he said. You chose to become what they needed, what no one else had the guts to be. She looked at him. And what's that? He took a long drink. A weapon without a leash. The next morning, the outpost went into full mobilization. Dozens of ships launched from hidden bays. Each carried specialized teams. No flags, no emblems, only the black mark of Project D7. They didn't speak to each other, didn't need to. They were all human, or close enough. Cross called them the Stormborn. And Lyria? She was now one of them. Her team was small. Grimm, an enhanced tactician named Holt, and a silent demolitions expert called Vex, a woman whose entire body was laced with self-regenerating explosive tissue. She spoke in hand signals, smiled when things blew up. Their mission, infiltrate a Harbinger seed, not a base, not a ship, a concept. Somewhere in the Haran Rift, the infection had taken hold of a derelict prison world, reshaped it into a labyrinth of shifting logic, recursive architecture, and illusions. The planet, now called Sverak, was a thought experiment turned weapon. No one who entered returned sane. So Earth sent people who were never quite sane to begin with. The infiltration began at dusk. Sverak's surface was wrong. The shadows moved in ways that broke Lyria's depth perception. Time lagged in bursts, minutes stretching into hours, then snapping back. Vex planted seismic disruptors just to stabilize reality. Inside the compound, things got worse. Walls bled code. Staircases led upward forever. Prisoners walked in loops, mumbling the same words. The truth has eyes. Some clawed at the walls until their fingers bled metal. Grimm covered Lyria's back while Holt decrypted the quantum locks. You okay? Grimm asked. She didn't answer, because she could hear it, the Harbinger speaking in her mind. Not in language, in feeling, in memory. It showed her Gorneks, the dead, the screaming, her parents, Cross walking into the fire. And then it whispered, "You belong to me. You were forged in my flame. You carry my story." But she remembered something else. Cross's voice gritted through blood. "You called the storm, kid. Now watch it burn." She snarled and cut the voice out with fire. They reached the core. Not a reactor, a mirror. Floating in the air, flickering with faces. Hers, her enemies, Grim, Cross, even strangers. Every possibility, every regret. Holt froze, transfixed. Then Vex shot him in the head. "Compromised," she said. Grim didn't argue. Lyria stepped forward and shoved the override core into the mirror. It cracked. The planet screamed. They barely made it out. Svarak collapsed behind them, folding into itself, devouring its own memories. As they soared into orbit, Lyria watched the surface vanish and felt something inside her unlock. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a weapon. And the galaxy had no idea what was coming. They called it the Cradle System. A binary star cluster surrounded by dust rings and broken planets, all centered around a single artificial structure older than memory. A planet-sized construct, smooth and dark as obsidian, shaped like a teardrop falling upward. The Harbinger's core. Not a base, not a ship. A seed. A singularity wrapped in memory. Alive in the way that cancer is alive. It didn't grow. It spread. And for the first time since the galaxy learned to crawl, someone had reached it willingly. Lyria stood aboard the Wraithborn, the Stormborn's flagship, staring at it through the command bay's reinforced glass. Cross stood beside her, armored head to toe in black D7 gear, red lights blinking from beneath his breastplate. His face was unreadable. Machine and man so fused, even his breathing sounded synthesized. "You don't have to go down there," he said. She didn't look at him. "Yes, I do." Cross nodded. "You remember what we are?" he asked. She tightened her gloves. "We're the answer to the question no one wants to ask." The assault began at 0400 station time. Stormborn drop pods rained down in synchronized silence. Not a single signal broadcast, not a single transmission leaked. The Wraithborn jammed every frequency in the system, while the Accord fleets hovered outside the perimeter, watching, too afraid to interfere. Inside the Seed, the war was not fought with bullets or bombs. It was fought with willpower. The first team disintegrated before touching the ground, not exploded, forgotten. Their molecules still existed, but not their identities. The Harbinger didn't kill. It erased. But the second team held. And the third. And when Lyria hit the surface, she didn't walk through hell. She commanded it. The landscape was surreal, a shifting maze of architecture that changed shape based on who looked at it. For most species, this was fatal. Their perception betrayed them, bent reality until their minds split apart. But Earth had prepared for this. They trained their soldiers in dream logic, combat inside hallucinations, trauma conditioning. Lyria's mind had been broken and reforged long before she ever came here. She marched through the maze with Roth's pistol, Cross's knife, and a will forged in fire. Vex flanked her, plasma spine glowing. Grim led the right flank, eyes scanning through 3-layered reality filters. They pushed forward, slow, methodical, stepping over the remains of infected scouts and shattered logic beasts made of code and bone. And then it spoke. Not in sound, in memory. Lyria stood in the bunker again. Gornek 7. The fire. The smell of ash. Only this time she was alone. No Cross, no Hammerfall, just her, clutching a child's body, her own, her hands soaked in blood, her voice gone. "You couldn't save them," the voice whispered. She didn't flinch. You were just a scared girl. You still are. She walked forward. Walls melted into familiar faces, her parents, the Alari elders, the Dominion soldiers who dragged her from her home. Is this what you became? It mocked. A weapon built by cowards? You call yourself a storm, but you're just the wind crying for what's gone. Lyria raised the knife and cut the memory apart. The illusion shattered. They were at the core. A chamber pulsing with thought, not light. A sphere hovered above them, black, rippling, reflecting every possibility. Inside it, every memory the Harbinger had consumed across eons. Civilizations, species, empires, erased, stored, processed. Lyria walked toward it, eyes burning. It's not alive, Grim muttered, but it knows we're here. Cross activated the final protocol. A containment pulse surged out from their armor, synchronizing with their neurolinks. The only way to kill something that lived through memory was to feed it something it couldn't process. Earth's trauma. The pulse hit the core, and the core screamed. Not sound, raw psychic pain. It recoiled, twisted. Black spires jutted from the floor, trying to defend itself. Too late. Vex stepped forward and detonated her body, sending shockwaves through the mind realm. The fragments of her thoughts burned through the core's architecture like acid. Grim collapsed, blood pouring from his ears, but he stayed conscious. Lyria reached the platform. The sphere began to shatter, flickering with past victims. It showed her 1,000,000 faces, 1,000,000,000 screams. It tried to bury her in regret. But she remembered the fire, the silence after the battle, the girl who refused to die. I'm not your memory, she whispered. I'm your end. She plunged Cross's knife into the core. The blast reached across systems. The entire cradle system buckled. Starships drifted. Accord fleets scrambled as data feeds burned. Thrask communication grids went dark. The seed didn't explode. It collapsed into itself, folding history, logic, and fear into a singularity. Inside the Wraithborn, Cross staggered. His neural implants surged. Lyria did it. A second later, every memory the Harbinger had stolen, every civilization, every victim, flooded back into the galaxy. The dead were still dead, but they were remembered again. And that was enough. She woke up floating, not in space, in a white room filled with voices, Earth tech, monitors. A screen blinked beside her. Subject: Lyria. Status: reboot complete stability, 93% designation, storm code. A Cross stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed. He didn't speak. She sat up slowly. Is it over? No, he said. It never ends. He handed her a small black badge. The Earth sigil. Skull, star, lightning bolt. You're not a victim anymore, he said. You're one of us. 3 weeks later, they landed on a border world. The Harbinger was gone. But the damage it had done wasn't. Entire systems were destabilized. Accord peacekeepers were overwhelmed. New threats emerged. Cults born from infected memories. Rogue AI running off Harbinger logic. Dominion warlords seizing power in the vacuum. The galaxy was bleeding. But it wasn't alone anymore. The Stormborn had returned. And at the head of their first strike, stepping off the ramp with black armor and eyes that didn't blink, was the girl who once sent a signal into the dark. They remembered Gornex. They remembered the scream. And now they'd remember the answer. Because when Earth hears you cry for help, it sends the storm.